A city burns on the North African coast. 50,000 people stand in chains, the last survivors of a civilization that once ruled the Mediterranean. For 6 days, Roman soldiers have fought street by street through Carthage, and now, in the spring of 146 BCE, one of history's greatest powers ceases to exist. This wasn't just conquest. This was annihilation. The road to this moment began not with military defeat, but with Carthage's unforgivable crime in Roman eyes: survival. After losing the Second Punic War in 201 BCE, Carthage had been crushed beneath impossible terms. Rome stripped away overseas territories, limited the fleet to 10 warships, and imposed an indemnity of 10,000 silver talents to be paid over 50 years. The treaty forbade Carthage from waging war anywhere without Rome's explicit permission. Roman senators believed they had neutered their greatest enemy forever. But Carthage refused to die quietly. Within decades, the city's merchants transformed defeat into prosperity. Grain and barley flowed from Carthaginian ports to Roman tables. Trade goods from this supposedly broken power appeared across the Mediterranean, even reaching the Balkans. By 153 BCE, Carthage had paid off every talent of its crushing debt and stood wealthier than before the war. That prosperity terrified Rome. When a Senate delegation visited Carthage that year, one member returned to Rome with proof of what he'd witnessed. Marcus Porcius Cato, later known as Cato the Elder, stood before the Senate and let fresh figs tumble from his toga onto the marble floor. These fruits, he announced, had been picked in Carthage just 3 days' sail from Italy. 3 days. That's how close Rome's resurgent enemy stood to striking again. Before the siege, Rome's long hatred against Carthage. Cato had fought against Hannibal decades earlier. He remembered when Carthaginian armies slaughtered 300,000 Romans in Italy alone, when 400 Italian towns fell to foreign invaders, when Hannibal's forces camped within sight of Rome itself for 16 years. The elderly senator couldn't forget. More importantly, he wouldn't let anyone else forget either. From that day forward, Cato ended every speech in the Senate with the same phrase, regardless of the topic being discussed. Whether debating road repairs or tax policy or agricultural reforms, Cato's conclusion never changed. Furthermore, I consider that Carthage must be destroyed. The Latin rang through the Senate chamber speech after speech, year after year. Carthago delenda est. Carthage must be destroyed. Not every Roman agreed. Publius Cornelius Scipio Nasica, son-in-law of the legendary Scipio Africanus, who had defeated Hannibal, stood as Cato's opposing voice. He argued that Rome needed Carthage as a threat, that fear of a common enemy kept Romans united and virtuous. Scipio Nasica ended his own speeches with the counterphrase, "Carthage must be preserved." The Senate heard this duel of slogans for years. Two stubborn old men shouting past each other about a city that posed no military threat whatsoever. But Carthage faced a more immediate danger than Roman rhetoric. Massinissa, king of Numidia and Rome's loyal ally, had spent 50 years steadily carving away Carthaginian territory. Every decade brought new Numidian incursions. The pattern became predictable. Massinissa would seize Carthaginian lands, Carthage would petition Rome for protection, and Rome would side with Massinissa. By 151 BCE, Numidia had absorbed roughly half of what Carthage controlled in 200 BCE. Carthage's pleas to Rome fell on deaf ears. The Treaty of 201 BCE prevented Carthage from defending itself militarily without Roman permission, but Rome consistently refused to grant that permission or to restrain its Numidian ally. For a proud power that once commanded the western Mediterranean, this helplessness bred desperation. When Massinissa laid siege to the Carthaginian town of Oroscopa in 151 BCE, something inside Carthage finally snapped. The Carthaginian government raised an army of 31,000 men under a general named Hasdrubal. These weren't the disciplined veterans who had followed Hannibal across the Alps. Decades of military restrictions had left Carthage with raw recruits, outdated equipment, and commanders who had never seen real combat. When this improvised force marched to relieve Oroscopa, disaster followed. The Numidians slaughtered the inexperienced army almost to the last man. But Carthage's military defeat mattered less than its political mistake. By raising that army, Carthage had violated the treaty. Rome finally had its justification. Cato's faction in the Senate seized the moment they'd been engineering for years. War was declared in 149 BCE. When panicked Carthaginian envoys reached Rome offering unconditional surrender, they arrived to find the decision already made. Rome's demands revealed the true goal. First came 300 hostages, sons of Carthage's leading families, sent to Rome in chains. The Carthaginians complied. Then Rome demanded all weapons and armor. Carthaginian officials delivered hundreds of thousands of swords, spears, javelins, and 2,000 catapults to the Roman camp at Utica. The warehouses emptied themselves of everything that might defend the city. Only then did Rome reveal its final condition. The consuls announced that every Carthaginian citizen must abandon their city and resettle at least 16 kilometers inland. Carthage itself would be burned to the ground. For a civilization built on Mediterranean commerce, for people whose wealth flowed from their harbors, this wasn't just exile, it was extinction. The messengers who brought this news back to Carthage barely escaped with their lives as the city erupted in rage. Inside the siege, Rome's cruelest methods. In 149 BCE, 80,000 Roman infantry and 4,000 cavalry landed at Utica, Carthage's former ally that had wisely defected to Rome. The consuls Manius Manilius and Lucius Marcius Censorinus commanded what should have been an easy execution. Carthage had surrendered its weapons. Its walls, however impressive, stood defended by citizens who had traded their arms for false promises of mercy. But something remarkable happened inside those walls. When Carthaginians learned they faced annihilation regardless of surrender, they transformed their city into an armory. Sacred temples became weapons factories where men and women worked side by side without pause. Every unoccupied space turned into a workshop. Each day, Carthaginian craftsmen produced 100 shields, 300 swords, 1,000 catapult missiles, 500 javelins, and as many catapults as materials allowed. Women cut off their hair when rope ran short, donating it for catapult strings. A city that had disarmed itself rearmed within weeks. The Romans discovered their easy victory had become a nightmare. When they attacked the harbour defences, Carthaginian swimmers crossed the water at night and set fire to Roman siege engines. Panicked legionaries fled in the darkness, and when they ignored orders to halt, Scipio Aemilianus, then just a mid-ranking military tribune, had his mounted bodyguard take them down to restore discipline. Carthaginian fireships sailed into the Roman fleet and set it ablaze. The assault stalled. Summer brought fresh horror to the besiegers. An epidemic swept through Roman camps in 148 BCE as temperatures soared. Meanwhile, the Carthaginian field army under Hasdrubal the Boeotarch continued resisting in the countryside. The city of Hippacra refused Roman demands despite sustained assault. Even Numidia's new king sent 800 cavalry to reinforce Carthage. 2 years into what was supposed to be a quick campaign, Rome's Third Punic War threatened to become as prolonged as the previous conflicts. The Roman people demanded change. In early 147 BCE, popular pressure forced the Senate to bend its own rules. Publius Cornelius Scipio Aemilianus, adopted grandson of the great Scipio Africanus, was only 36 or 37 years old, well below the minimum age of 42 for consul. The Senate lifted age restrictions and appointed him commander in Africa anyway. What the young Scipio lacked in years, he compensated for with ruthless efficiency. Scipio tightened the siege into true strangulation. He constructed a massive mole across the harbour entrance, finally cutting off the supply ships that had kept Carthage fed. The Carthaginians responded with desperate ingenuity, excavating a new channel to the sea and building a makeshift fleet in secret. When this improvised navy sailed out, it caught Romans completely by surprise. But instead of pressing their advantage, the Carthaginian captains wasted precious time in a vainglorious display of their achievement. The confused naval engagement that followed ended with Carthaginian ships retreating in disorder, losing many vessels to pursuing Romans. Scipio then constructed a large brick structure in the harbour area that towered over the city walls, allowing 4,000 Roman archers to rain missiles onto Carthaginian ramparts from close range. In late 147 BCE, he left just enough force to maintain the stranglehold and marched 25 kilometers south to Nepheris, where Carthage's field army had established fortified winter quarters. After a 3-week siege, Scipio stormed the position. Numidian cavalry pursued the fleeing defenders and brought them down. Few escaped. With the field army destroyed and the harbour sealed, Carthage stood alone. Spring 146 BCE brought the final assault. Roman forces breached the harbour defences and poured into the city. What followed was not battle, but systematic slaughter. Romans advanced street by street, building by building. Carthaginian defenders contested every alley despite having no hope of victory. They fought from rooftops and doorways, turning each structure into a small fortress. The advance slowed to a crawl as soldiers cleared houses one by one. Fire became Rome's primary weapon. Entire city blocks burned as legionaries set buildings ablaze to flush out defenders. Many Carthaginians, especially the elderly and children, perished in the flames. Others died when buildings collapsed. Those who survived the fires were trampled by Roman cavalry. So many bodies choked the streets that Roman engineers had to stop their advance to clear corpses before continuing. The dead literally became part of the assault roads, their bodies incorporated into the rubble the Romans used to advance. For 6 days, this horror continued. On the 7th day, envoys emerged from the citadel atop Byrsa Hill, begging Scipio to spare those willing to surrender. According to the historian Appian, who based his account on eyewitness testimony from Polybius, 50,000 Carthaginians came down from the citadel and were led into captivity. From a population that may have exceeded 250,000 before the siege, only these 50,000 remained. But Scipio's mercy didn't extend to everyone. 900 Roman and Italian deserters had entrenched themselves in the Temple of Eschmoun alongside Hasdrubal the Boetharch and his family. These men knew execution awaited them if captured. They had switched sides during the war, and Rome never forgave desertion. As Roman forces closed in on the temple, Hasdrubal made his choice. He slipped away from his men, approached Scipio bearing an olive branch, and surrendered at the Roman commander's feet. The deserters inside the temple saw their general sit at Scipio's feet and begged for silence. When it was granted, they heaped reproaches upon Hasdrubal, cursing him for his betrayal. Then they set the temple ablaze. As flames consumed the building, Hasdrubal's wife appeared at the entrance, dressed in her finest clothing, despite the circumstances. Her 2 sons stood beside her. In a voice loud enough for Scipio to hear, she spoke. "For you, Roman, the gods have no cause of indignation, since you exercise the right of war." Upon this, Hasdrubal, betrayer of his country and her temples, of me and his children, may the gods of Carthage take vengeance, and you be their instrument. She ended both children before Hasdrubal's eyes, cast their forms into the flames, and jumped in after them. The 900 deserters followed, choosing fire over Roman execution. Hasdrubal, who had previously declared he would die with his city rather than surrender, lived. Scipio took him to Rome for his triumph, then allowed him to retire quietly in the Italian countryside, forgotten and despised. After the fall, punishment slavery